I'm John Smith. Yes, that really is my name.
So you're John Smith.
I'm one of the 600 and some thousand John Smiths at least. I've been with the Colville Chamber now for a little over 5 years. I was elected to be the president of the chamber in 2009. What a wonderful time to become the president of the Chamber of Commerce during one of the greatest economic catastrophes our nation has ever known. And so one of my roles was to go around and talk with local businesses and find out just how the chamber could help. And so the other day when Sheila said, Kathy wants to hear stories of how regulations have impacted local businesses, but you only have 3 to 5 minutes. I need 3 to 5 hours. The simple fact of the matter is, following the election in 2008, fear of regulation put our economy into an absolute free fall on every level. Now, this past week, I'm thrilled that Steve is here, because this past week, Stimson Lumber laid off 65 employees. And I was chatting with a person from Colville not too long ago, and I was mentioning how the reduction in the output of the Colville National Forest would affect local jobs. And I said, even going to the guidelines established in the 80s by the environmental community that they said were acceptable, when you look at the reductions from those levels that are proposed today, we're talking about tens of thousands of jobs in our community directly tied to forestry in that reduction. Now, I was talking with someone the other day and they said, oh, there aren't 10,000 people working in the forest industry in Stevens County. Well, that entire statement is a part of the problem. If you look at the economy of our nation as a whole, the way that the economy works is like a tree. And at the very bottom of that tree are the roots. Those roots are the natural resource-based industries. That's farming, that's timber, that's mining, that's energy. Those are the roots. Those are what fuels the rest of the growth of the tree. Working your way up that tree, you have the trunk. That's manufacturing. And then as you go from manufacturing, you work your way into retail, you work your way into the service sector, recreation, and then ultimately at the very top of the tree, the very smallest branches are local government and even federal government. Well, what we're seeing today is we're seeing regulatory policy creating a root-bound tree, where we're cutting off the roots, we're digging that tree up, and we're containing on every front the expansion of productive, extractive industries, and we're desperately dumping fertilizer on so that we can retain the government jobs at the top. And that is wrong. It is morally and ethically wrong. In Stevens County, Forest Service employees, well, the average federal employee in Stevens County makes about $86,000 a year. And I don't fault anybody for making a good living. But the average employee at Steve's Mill makes $35,000 a year. So the people who are making the regulations are living in an entirely different world from the people who are living under those regulations. So when we see a timber mill like Stimson Lumber lay off 65 employees, there are, for every 1 employee that's laid off at Stimson, that's 4 other employees in retail, in manufacturing, in the service industries, in recreation, in tourism, that disappear because there is no money. And so when it comes to our specific area, when it comes to specific regulations, I want to talk about one of those subsidiary industries that is connected to this timber industry and directly related to the reduction and the promise of greater regulatory control there. My father-in-law, Greg Heater, he bought the filing room from Boggin Brothers Lumber. He worked in it for a number of years, and Boggins was looking for a little bit of capital, and he said, you know what, I think I can run this better, why don't you sell it to me?
What's the filing room?
The filing room is where they, all of the blades that cut the timber, everything from 10 to 12 inches to 36 inches, they would bring to the filing room, and bandsaws and all of them, they would bring to the filing room. The filing room would make sure that they were sharp so they could cut the lumber.
Most important part of it.
Most important part of the mill. Without the filing room, the mill doesn't work. And so Greg invested $500,000 in state-of-the-art technology so that he could make sure that the product that he was putting out enabled the mills to stay at peak production. And so as the Colville National Forest is talking about reducing the harvest amounts, as they're cluttering the process to harvest that with NEPA and SEPA requirements, the simple fact of the matter is the amount of timber running through the mills is less, so that the amount of demand for sharpening blades is less. And so my father-in-law, who at his equipment was state-of-the-art. It was semi-robotic. A little robotic arm would pick up a blade, it would set it on, it would sharpen it down to a micron's width in some cases. But because of the way that the timber industry is now, Greg, who employed at one point up to 10 employees making that happen, Greg right now is volunteering to sharpen blades for Columbia Cedar and for Vaughan Brothers Lumber. I say volunteering because he owns his own business. And so to keep those doors in, he's not getting paid. Now, because of the volume of business that he does, just to keep his doors open, and because of the volume of his investment, there are many people today that would consider him rich. And we've heard lots of statements lately about how the rich, those dirty business owners, just aren't carrying their fair share. Well, I've watched Greg for the past 3 years volunteer to keep the economy afloat. I watched as he and his wife gave up necessities, not luxuries, so that they could retain 2 or 3 employees for as long as they could. And so when we want to talk about regulation, 65 employees, that's not much. Well, in our economy, in Stevens County, in Colville, those 65 employees that were shed due to the over-oppressive culture within the Colville National Forest, those 65 employees translate into hundreds of employees at our local retail level, at our local service level, at our local hospital, because there are people who are no longer going to be here. That translates into education. Right now, the Colville High School is at 60% the enrollment that they were just 10 years ago. 60%. That's because families can't afford to live there due to the regulation that's being imposed upon us. So I'm getting close to my 5 minutes, so I'll make the next one straight.
That's good.
Okay, farmers market.
You have more time.
Okay. My wife and I own the single largest farmers market north of Spokane. 1/3 of our income comes from farming. And this summer, actually after last winter, the Food Safety and Modernization Act was passed by the federal government. Now, right now, if you turned on your radio on the way in today, they were talking about cantaloupe recalls and beef recalls. Did y'all hear that? Okay. Well, what many people don't appreciate is in the United States, we have one of the best food tracking systems in the world. It took them 6 weeks to figure out where contaminated cucumbers came from in Europe. It took us hours to figure out where contaminated cantaloupe came from and to get it off the shelves. That is impressive. That is incredible. We have a system that works. But the Food Safety and Modernization Act adds one more level of regulatory control, one more level of labeling requirement, one more layer of paperwork, one more layer of risk to small to medium scale producers who are looking at taking those raw agricultural products and processing them through manufacturing into something that can instead of my farmers at my farmers market just raising apples for local consumption, my farmers need the ability to take that and through manufacturing produce products that we can export, that we can ship out, that we can ship not just to Chihuahua and Colville and Kettle Falls, but throughout the Northwest or perhaps the country or even the world. In order to do that, we need agricultural manufacturing. The Food Safety and Modernization Act, again, adds more regulation, just like our forests are saying. It adds more tracking, and it creates a greater depth of bureaucracy where you have people, once again, just like the Forest Service, who are making 3 times the people that they're regulating and have no experience in the industry whatsoever, making rules that apparently aren't even subject to Congress. Because what we heard from the Colville National Forest as they're proposing their new regulations is we don't care if Congress passes regulation creating new wilderness or not. We're just going to regulate the Colville National Forest just like it was wilderness. As far as I'm concerned, that is outright sedition. If they are willing to go against an act of Congress to do what they want to do, then maybe it's time for those highly paid employees to be replaced by people who are accustomed to working for less and who are more in touch with the communities they represent. And so, if we want our economy to grow, the way that it will grow is by allowing those base, fundamental, foundational elements of our culture to once again begin to grow and produce. And yet, over and over and over again, they are the target of regulation. You know, you ask Steve how many culverts that he had. Well, I don't know how many culverts Boise Cascade has, but I know I've sold logs to Steve, and I know that on my property alone, I have 6 culverts. And you start looking at that on-site regulation that they're starting to say, my 20-acre farm would suddenly become an industrial site when I go to harvest a couple truckloads a year of timber to ship to Steve. That's insanity. It's a 20-acre farm, for crying out loud.